Last fall, I was grateful to make an 8-day retreat after a very full season of ministry. In the course of that retreat, I learned a lot about my level of engagement with my smartphone. I want to share some of those insights with you today on the Unhurried Living podcast.
No surprise, I have an iPhone, and Alan has one as well. And you likely have some sort of smartphone too. You might even be listening to this episode on one. Statistics tell us that about 2/3 of all of our downloads are to smartphones. Well, we've titled this episode Managing Our Omnipresent Smartphones because most of us carry them with us all the time. And how many of us use it as an alarm in the morning and engage it in the last few moments before falling asleep at night? It's always there.
Right. So, as I mentioned at the front of the episode, I enjoyed 8 days of silent retreat at Eastern Point Retreat Center in Gloucester, Mass. Last November after a season of ministry in which I was out of town or out of country 49 out of 70 or 71 days. I was doing a lot of ministry about a year ago. It was perfectly timed as a season for both physical and soul rest. So I was recently reviewing about 80 pages of handwritten journal from that retreat, and I realized I had done a lot of writing about how I use and sometimes overuse my iPhone and what I wanted to do about that. So on the first day of the retreat, I began to be aware of a desire to set my phone aside for this retreat, but I also realized then how many different ways I use my phone. I actually took time and made a list of all of those functions. So as I list them here in a moment, see how many of these apply to you. You could probably think of some others that I didn't list. So for example, my iPhone, it's my watch, my alarm clock, my bookshelf, my Bible, my newspaper, my communication center for emails, texts, Wi-Fi calling, and phone calling. It's how I stay in touch with hundreds of family members and friends and acquaintances through social media. It's often my entertainment. It's my navigator, my travel agent, my camera, my stopwatch, my financial manager with all the bank apps and personal accounting and such. It's my source of music. It's my physical trainer. It's my weather channel, my calendar, my address book, my task manager, my calculator, my wallet. It's even my boarding pass for flights. I just listed 22 different functions that my iPhone serves, many of which used to be served by some other device or item. I used to use a physical calendar. Not anymore. I used to have a physical address book, a portable cassette tape player, a paper to-do list, and you get the idea. The convenience of my iPhone is that many of those functions can be served in one place. The challenge of my iPhone is that many of those functions require me to remain engaged with my iPhone more and more of the time. So as I was on retreat on the second day, this is what I wrote in my journal. I said, I intend to remain unplugged during this retreat as far as my iPhone goes. But what does that mean? I just got back from a walk, but I felt I needed my phone to see where I was going on the map. I found myself then thinking about researching my ride back to the airport at the end of this retreat. Was I going to use ride sharing? Was I going to get a ride to the train? Well, I could use the web to research that, but that wouldn't be exactly unplugged. So what you can see is I can easily get lost in other researching or checking or even just escaping. I feel an invitation to unplug in as many ways as possible so that I can more fully plug into you. So that's the end of that journal entry. Now, it may seem obvious that it's hard to be on retreat if you're still connected to your phone. I mean, I had already decided I wasn't going to take calls, I wasn't going to check my texts or emails, and I wasn't going to stay connected to social media. But I hadn't thought into all of the other ways that I use my iPhone. And it took that whole first day for it to dawn on me what my iPhone fasting was going to involve. So now we move to retreat day 3 and my journal again. I checked in at the end of that day, and this is what I wrote. It's 7:15 p.m., and I'm struggling with my intention to unplug from this iPhone on this retreat. Through this day, I've turned my phone on to check the weather, look at the map to see where I was walking, prune emails without replying. That was breaking my rules. To research quick dry travel ankle socks. I am not exactly sure why that seems so critical on my retreat, but I did. Read the news. Of course, don't want to be out of touch, and peek at social media, but not interact. So again, it's sneaky how my iPhone just keeps kind of being omnipresent like that. And this wasn't exactly a list of immoral activities. It's just a record of how often I turn to my iPhone through the course of a day. It's not the unforgivable sin, but it isn't, and it wasn't then what I intend. Do I use my iPhone to escape certain thoughts or feelings? Maybe. I could also escape into a novel just as easily. I might go to bed early to escape. But that's not what I've come to this retreat for. Lord have mercy. That was the end of that day's entry. So then again, the next day, day 4, I talked about a conversation with my spiritual director that I'd had in the morning. Every day I would sit with her for about 20 minutes to report on my experience of prayer the day before and about my intentions for the day that lay ahead. So again, I'm back to my journal, and this is what I wrote that day. I shared with my spiritual director my revised intention about my iPhone and computer as far as the unplugging goes. I told her that I was going to use my phone for information functions like my clock, my alarm, my map, checking the weather, using my camera to take pictures of the beautiful scenery. But I was going to leave it on airplane mode to avoid checking things like my emails and texts and social media and voicemails and such. And what I decided, and this is what I wrote, I said, I think this practical experience will be a more creative approach to unplugging that I could engage when I get back home. Maybe I'll learn something here I could share with others. Maybe it's better to have a creative approach to unplugging than the all or nothing approach that I began with on this retreat. Maybe learning moderation is more helpful to me than an abstinence approach. And I think, for some of us, we may decide we don't want to have smartphones, and you can decide to do that. Anybody can. But what I decided I needed to experiment with on that retreat was, what would it look like to use my phone in moderation? What would it look like for there to be stretches of time where I didn't look at it at all? Brings us to day 5. And in my journal again, this is what I wrote. Unplugged. I'm really not happy with myself on this one. As the retreat began, I tried to abstain completely from my iPhone, but I quickly saw that there were a few ways my phone could be helpful, so I fudged things a little. Then I decided to aim at moderation. That's been a bit hit or miss as well. So for example, I have a few novels on my iPhone that I borrowed from our library. I enjoy reading good stories, but that really isn't exactly why I flew across the country to this retreat center. So maybe it would help me to ask this. How is God with me in all this? Is God angry with my overusing my iPhone compared to what I intended? Does God want me to add the distance of guilt and shame to the distraction of my device? I hardly think that makes much sense. In any of this, my Father in heaven desires simply that I would draw near. God's addressed the issue of guilt and shame in the loving gift of his Son's suffering and death. He's not looking to make me suffer in that way. And then a little later in the day, I wrote this. I realize today that my discipline of unplugging is mainly about avoiding distraction. I was more focused on the theoretical bad of distraction as something that I shouldn't do. I wasn't thinking about why it is that I distract myself. Why do I do that? I distract myself, I guess, because I'm afraid that there are unpleasant truths to be faced. I distract myself because somewhere deep in my assumptions or beliefs, I still have a vision of a God who is at least mildly upset with me at best and really frustrated with me at worst. But I think God is saying something more like this: Alan, I want you to hear me. I am not angry. You do foolish things at times. I'm not angry. Yes, sometimes you fail to live out my love for others. I'm not angry with you. I want good for you. I'm doing all I can to tend you, nourish you, guide you, bless you. I want the fruit of your life to bless many. I want this for my glory, not yours. I want to bless you so that you will become a blessing to many, many others. This is what I'm working on. Being angry with you does not further that aim. So then we come to day 6, and in my journal I wrote, I'm continuing to learn unplugged as I go, but the Lord is not angry with me. I'm learning to be more unplugged day by day. Leaving the phone on airplane mode is helping me access the clock and a morning alarm, but I do feel like I've been able to listen better and give God more of my attention. Now, finally, as I was coming to the close of the 8 days, I wrote this as far as my intentions about unplugging back at home. How was I going to take this home? So this is what I wrote. I said, I want to practice unplugging in connection with our monthly day retreat and our weekly Sabbath days. Whenever possible, I want to read physical books. I'll read on my Kindle as sort of a second choice, but I'll avoid reading on my phone. It's just too easy to get involved in work that way. In those day retreats and weekly Sabbaths, I'll let social media rest. I need a day in which I'm not paying attention to statistics about my books or comments on a social media feed or statistics about websites and podcasts and blog posts. I realize I'm tempted to seek recognition in these rather than in God. And then, as much as possible, I want to have stretches of time when airplane mode is the default on those days. So I think one of my big insights gained was just how my smartphone is actually training me in distraction. It teaches me that whenever I have a free moment, I don't need to be bored or inactive. I can just lift my phone back to my face and find something to do. But I think I'm learning my brain needs moments of quiet, moments of disengagement, moments to think my own thoughts, and not to have to react to someone else's thoughts.
We encourage you to give thought to ways in which you want to sometimes limit your engagement with your own smartphone. Are there moments in a day when you have creative or strategic work to do that requires your full attention? Take advantage of your airplane mode feature. When we're writing, for example, we need to be able to sink down into that deep thinking that just isn't possible when the phone is nearby and ready to ring, ding, or beep. Second, you could consider turning off all audio and visual notifications on your apps. My phone still rings, but I don't let it remind me with little red numbers and circles how many items I've missed. I don't know how many emails are waiting for me. I choose when to address emails. Those numbers are just another invitation to distraction. And third, remember smartphones are remarkable servants, but they are tyrannical masters. Which one is it for you these days? What healthy boundaries can you set up on your phone? As a way of thinking about your own smartphone use, we've created a great little download that includes Alan's list of the many ways he uses his smartphone, and then some questions that you can use to make decisions about your own smartphone use. You can access this worksheet by visiting unhurriedliving.com/podcast bonus. And as many of you know by now, once you've accessed your first download, you'll be granted access to an online resource page that lets you download all of our past worksheets, and it will update with new worksheets as they become available in upcoming podcasts. So again, go to unhurriedliving.com/podcast bonus. And thanks so much again for listening today. We hope Alan's thoughts about his smartphone use from that 8-day retreat gave you something to think about. And as always, we love connecting with more and more friends like you who want to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better.